Welcome everyone to tonight's talk, Innovations in Sustainability and ESG, Lessons from Leading B Corps, which is part of our sustainability series. Today is Earth Day, and President Biden pledged to cut US greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030. That's going to require tremendous actions by corporations and by all of us, and I can't think of a better evening to hold this important program. Many agree that socially and environmentally responsible companies are vital for everyone's future, but wonder how companies can effectively achieve the triple bottom line of social, environmental, and financial performance. B Corps, which are a relatively new type of company, have developed an innovative set of environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, practices to deliver enhanced value to all corporate stakeholders, not just investors or shareholders. And that includes employees, consumers, communities, and the environment. And we're going to hear tonight how B Corps are driving systemic change. I'm delighted to have Lorna Davis, Dave Rappaport, and Chris Marquis, who are leaders in corporate sustainability, join us tonight to share why they think B Corps make a difference, why it's important for corporations to focus on sustainability and social impact issues, and also to share their journeys and visions for the future. Thank you to the Princeton Club of New York, who's sponsoring tonight's program, and our co-sponsors, the Cornell Alumni Association and Conscious Capitalism New York City. Now it's an honor to introduce our panel. Lorna Davis has served as president of multinational consumer goods companies for more than 20 years, including Danone and Kraft. She was the president of Kraft China and president of Nabisco North America. She's been a key leader in Danone's purpose journey and as a global ambassador for the B Corp movement. In 2017, Lorna served as CEO and chairwoman of Danone North America, where she established that $6 billion entity as a public benefit corporation, and it achieved B Corp status in 2018, making it the largest B Corp in the world. Lorna is a member of numerous boards, including the Social Mission Board of Seventh Generation, the Integrity Board of Sir Kensington, both companies owned by Unilever, the Advisory Board of Radical Impact, and the Board of B Lab Global. She's now working on bringing Indigenous wisdom into business through a series of fire circles with Indigenous elders. Lorna's done a TED Talk on radical interdependence that's been viewed by over 2 million people. Dave Rappaport is the Global Social Mission Officer for Ben & Jerry's, leading the iconic Vermont-based ice cream company's commitment to be a force for good through the day-to-day impacts of their operations and their value chain, and using their influence as a business through activism campaigns promoting progressive social change. Racial equity is a major component of this work. Dave has been a mission-driven activist for more than 30 years, spanning the business, nonprofit, and government sectors. Prior to joining Ben & Jerry's in 2017, he was vice president of Earth and Community Care for Aveda, where he worked across the business to help drive the pioneering prestige beauty company's mission to do good in the world and strive for environmental leadership and responsibility. And before joining the business world, Dave spent 2 decades in the public policy arena in roles such as executive director of the Vermont Public Interest Research Group and various senior staff positions with the environmental organization Greenpeace, including directing their national work on toxic chemicals and pollution prevention. And Christopher Marquis is the Samuel C. Johnson Professor in Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell University. He's the author of Better Business, How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. His research and writing focus on how businesses are creating a more resilient and sustainable capitalism by focusing on the elusive triple bottom line of environmental, social, and financial performance. Prior to joining Cornell, Christopher worked for 10 years at Harvard Business School, where he developed an award-winning course on social entrepreneurship. He's the author of more than 20 peer-reviewed academic articles and more than 50 Harvard business cases on topics related to sustainable business, and he's earned awards for scholarly achievement from the Academy of Management and the American Sociological Association. He earned a PhD in psychology and business administration from the University of Michigan. So you can see we have a really, really distinguished panel tonight, and I'm delighted to welcome them. And I'm Wendy Gerber, CEO of the International Consulting Group, a global strategy, branding, and marketing consulting firm driving business growth for many of the world's leading corporations with a triple bottom line approach focused on sustainability and ESG strategy and integration. I've led corporate strategy, sustainability, marketing, and governance for global corporations, including Ralph Lauren, Citigroup, and Kenneth Cole. I'm also a member of the board of directors of Conscious Capitalism New York City, an organization driving the movement to reimagine capitalism and build purpose-driven business models, as well as a member of the Sustainability and Innovation Committee of the French American Chamber of Commerce. I'm a graduate of Princeton, NYU Law School, and also studied at the Wharton School and University of London. Tonight, we're going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then our speakers will answer questions from the audience for about 15 to 20 minutes. Please remember to click on the Q&A tab and type your answers into the box, and we'll get to as many as we can. So let's start with looking at sustainability and social impact and set the stage for our discussion tonight. The Business Roundtable made an announcement in 2019 redefining the purpose of business from its traditional focus on shareholders to instead prioritizing and caring for all stakeholders. And the co-founders of the B Corp movement wrote that this was a significant shift, moving to focus on all stakeholders, customers, employees, suppliers, communities, and shareholders. Certified B Corp corporations, or B Corps, as we'll refer to them, are committed to using business as a force for good, with strong metrics to show that they walk the talk. Dave, Ben & Jerry's website says, "We love making ice cream, but using our business to make the world a better place gives our work its meaning." You even creatively embed social mission into your ice cream names. Can you share with us why it's important for Ben & Jerry's to have a true values-driven purpose, seeking to make a positive impact that isn't pursued for the purpose of business success, even though it might generate business success too?
Well, sure. And hi, everybody. Nice to be with you this evening. Simply put, Ben & Jerry's wouldn't exist if our co-founders hadn't found a way to use the business as a force for good. There's a story about how early on, when Ben and Jerry got together and started this business in the old converted gas station in Burlington, Vermont, they just wanted to make ice cream and food and hang out together. And after about 3 years of it, Ben found himself doing all of the things that you have to do to make a business run and succeed. And he was ready to sell it. He had a friend who was kind of a mentor at the time, and he was complaining to him about this. And his friend said, "Well, if you don't like the way business is, why don't you change it?" And that got Ben thinking, and he realized that this was an opportunity to try to figure out a different way that businesses could be, to in effect change the nature of business. And from then on, really to use the business as a way to drive systemic social change around the progressive values that he and Jerry held. And so that's really what continues to drive the business today. We have a three-part mission. So the social mission, along with the product and financial mission, really intertwine to drive the business. But it's important to us because it really is the reason why we make ice cream, and aside from loving eating it, and so it's just foundational to who we are.
That's great. And it's something for us all to remember how important it is to drive social mission. When we take a bite of delicious ice cream, you really manage to do both. And Lorna, as CEO of Danone North America, you served as senior advisor to former Danone CEO Emmanuel Faber to help him push the company to the forefront of the sustainability revolution in the food and beverage industry. And you're on the board of Seventh Generation, whose goal is to create a better world 7 generations from now. What did you think of President Biden's announcement this morning, and why is it so important for corporations to lead on sustainability and social impact?
But I was really excited to hear about President Biden's announcement. And I can tell you that I'm really hoping that that he follows that up with the kind of action that we would hope to see, which we can talk about later if you like. But one of the things that I'm really hoping is that he encourages this country to re-engage with the Sustainable Development Goals, because I have a strong view that the Sustainable Development Goals can help us to systematically improve things, but we can talk about that later too. And I think the reason that big companies particularly need to take seriously their responsibility in the world is probably best exemplified by Martin Luther King's quote. I think I apologize if I get it a little bit wrong, but he said, power without love is abusive and destructive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. And I think that all of those of us who have power have a responsibility to use it with love. And one of the challenges I think that we all face is many of the people who are doing really great things in the area of better business are small. And that's terrific because we follow them and we take our inspiration from them. But big companies, and dare I say big countries like this one, need to use their power responsibly. And this is President Biden's example was a good one today, but B Corps are an excellent example of the marriage of those two things.
Thank you, and that's certainly an inspiring quote. So Chris, what's driving this movement forward? Is it the Business Roundtable, the World Economic Forum, Larry Fink of BlackRock, John Mackey's movement of conscious capitalism, which is reimagining capitalism to have businesses lead with purpose, or is it millennials?
Lots of different groups in there. I mean, I think they all have different sort of motivations. I think, the conscious capitalism, B Corps, I think are the real sort of authentic drivers in many ways that really want the world to be a better place. I think that the Business Roundtable, which I do really appreciate their statement, but I think, the world is at a breaking point. If you look at the environmental degradation, issues of inequality, discrimination, and business realizes that if they don't respond in some way, large businesses, their social license to operate will be, come under question. They may suffer governmental regulation, which they really don't want. So they realize we better start actually, trying to resolve some of these issues. So I think their motivation is much more sort of instrumental, not necessarily socially focused. But I really appreciate it. And I think, Larry Fink too, realizes that if companies are actually more responsible environmentally, given the climate crisis, that mitigates long-term climate risk. And also appreciate the millennials, my students, who I've learned a ton from and am inspired by their focus on these issues too.
So Dave and Lorna, when we chatted the other night, you both have such fascinating backgrounds and very different. I'm sure our audience would be really interested in learning about your career journeys. How did you get involved in this area, and why is it personally important to you? Lorna, let's start with you.
Well, I came to this journey very late. I spent most of my, the early and middle part of my career only caring about myself and getting ahead. I really didn't think about it too much. And I was sort of motoring up that ladder as fast as I could. And I think for me, China changed everything. I went to China in 2006 and I lived there for 6 years running first the Danone business, and then Kraft bought that business, so I took over the two together. And it was in China when I really saw what would happen, what will happen, what is happening when 1 billion people in China who had up until then had very little and were using not very many of the Earth's resources per capita, what would happen when they wanted and got what developed countries, I say in inverted commas, had. And I saw it operating real life in front of my eyes across that 6 years. And it kind of brought me to my knees at a sort of personal, moral level. And I had never lived in the US before. I came to the US after that. And it was a huge shock to me personally. And I realized that I didn't want to live like that anymore. And I explored the idea of going to work for a not-for-profit, but then, and Anjiri Daradis would be pleased with what I'm going to say now, I realized how broken that system was, because I was going to spend half my time in Silicon Valley, getting money from people who really didn't care too much, and the other half in Africa, giving it to people in a way that I didn't understand. So that didn't make sense. So at that point, I chose to come back to corporate life with Danone to try and put these two journeys together, to try and put business and purpose together. I understand business. I think it does. It's the most efficient system that I know, and it's the one that I know something about. And so for me to blend these two has made the most sense, which is why I've spent the last 6 or 7 years in this space.
Dave, can you share your journey as well?
Yeah, well, I started out sort of on the opposite side of things, I guess. I was an environmental activist for the first 20 years of my career. And a lot of that time was with Greenpeace. And I did things like organized direct action protests, where we actually tried to plug up the pipes of polluters. And we actually succeeded working with other community groups to shut down a few of them. I found myself climbing the Statue of Liberty to hang a banner about nuclear weapons testing, and hiking out into the Nevada test site to try to stop a nuclear weapons test. So I sort of had those kinds of experiences, as well as being involved with the negotiations for the Basel Convention to end the export of hazardous waste from the first world to the global south. But after about 20 years of doing that kind of policy work, activism and public policy, I began to sort of yearn for some more tangibility. I also had a young family, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to, pay for college and all the rest. And I had on my board of directors at the time of the organization I was leading people like Jeffrey Hollander, the co-founder of Seventh Generation. And it occurred to me that, they were really working in important ways to make change, and that there were lots of ways to make change. And I began to be curious about how you do that from the other side of the fence. And so I had the opportunity to go to work for a renewable energy company here in Vermont that did global work in about 2001. And so I was in the renewable energy industry for 5 years before going to work for Jeffrey at Seventh Generation for a while. And in my the early part of my business career, I was so surprised to learn how interesting business was. I had no idea as an activist and how not only how interesting it was, but how many opportunities there are to really drive change. So that's been my story. I had the opportunity to work for the governor of Vermont for a little while, and then I went on to work for Aveda before coming back here to Vermont to work for Ben & Jerry's. And Ben & Jerry's really is such a nice sort of capstone for the things that I've done over now 40 years, because it brings together the activism and the commitment to systemic change through policy with all of the things that we have to do individually as businesses to walk the talk. And so it's for me a very, very nice, satisfying place to be right now.
And it's so interesting how your diverse backgrounds bring so much to this field. Lorna, on your part, having the operational experience really is critical in terms of driving triple bottom line growth and understanding how companies operate and how to really drive change. And for you, Dave, having the nonprofit and activism background really can help create change and enable very strong partnerships, I'm sure, with some of the nonprofits that you're working with. So Chris, let's talk about your path and how it ties into tonight's topic. You studied sustainable business for 15 years, and you wrote in your latest book, Better Business, that the B Lab founders envisioned a legal framework that would actually make higher purpose a competitive advantage. So how is that happening in practice, and what makes a B Corp different?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And it's sort of, talking about my path after these two stories is a little daunting. But I live in my ivory tower, and fortunately, lots of interesting students come in, and I get to learn a ton from them. I'm sort of half joking. I love being out, talking and learning and being active myself. But a lot of my learning does actually come from my students. I mean, the whole idea of B Corps I had never heard of. I was teaching on sustainable business when I was at HBS, and one day in class, students said, we shouldn't be studying companies like IBM and Goldman Sachs. We should be studying B Corps. And I'm like, what the heck is a B Corp? This was about 2009. And really transformed my life, because learning about the model that the B Corp founders, the entrepreneurs that are involved in the movement have created, I think it's a really tremendously most powerful model for change I've seen. And I think the reasons why is that it gets to the accountability through ESG metrics and benchmarking and learning for companies, also gets to the governance of companies. So there's a whole new type of company that didn't exist 10 years ago that is now, across the US states, is spreading around the world. Rwanda just passed benefit corporation law, in addition to many countries in Europe and countries in South America. So I think that this accountability and governance dimension gives some tangibility for how companies can actually change to make themselves better. So I think it's really powerful.
Thank you. So Dave, on Ben & Jerry's website, it says that in 2012, with the full support of your parent company, Unilever, Ben & Jerry's became the first wholly owned subsidiary in the world to gain B Corp certification. Why was this important, and how did it change the way you operate and impact your social mission?
Well, to be honest, it really didn't change anything. I think that Ben & Jerry's in some ways was a B Corp before there were B Corps, but it was very important for us to be a B Corp early on to support the movement. It's always been a part of the vision that we've had to try to inspire others and bring about change within the business world. And so the B movement has already been well described as a major force in doing that. And so we wanted to become part of that movement to really help build it. And so that's really still today the major factor for us is supporting this kind of change across the business world, to really ensure that businesses can be run with a wider range of stakeholders in mind for a true purpose beyond simply profit. For so long, as people, we're motivated by lots of different things. In our stories, you hear about the sort of, drive for financial security and ambition, but we all are multidimensional. We have altruistic sides. We want to have connection and with others and all of these different things. And there's not really a good reason why businesses should be any different. For so long, businesses have had a free pass to say, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff, because if you're making profits, the rest of it will take care of itself. And we now know, of course, that's a lot of BS. And so this very fundamental notion of really answering to all stakeholders and not just shareholders is just so critical. And we're dedicated to be supporting that.
Thank you. And Lorna, Emmanuel Faber, Danone's former CEO, had said something very similar to what Dave just said, that answering the question about corporate purpose in straight terms is the best way for Danone brands to reestablish trust with employees, consumers, partners, civil society, and governments, and really to express the company's longtime commitment for dual economic and social progress. I know you are very intimately involved with the B Corp movement. You're a global ambassador. How did becoming a B Corp change the way Danone operates, and why do you feel that it matters?
So it's interesting that when Dave makes the point that in many ways Ben & Jerry's was a B Corp before B Corp, it was kind of born B, we call it. And interesting, you said that Faber said that it was to re-establish trust. And that actually sums up the different role of B Corp in our journey versus Ben & Jerry's journey. So while Danone has had a purpose for a long time and would have considered itself to be a good company, there was no doubt that we didn't know what good looked like. We weren't measuring good. I mean, we can all dream about good, but we didn't really know what that actually meant and in what areas were we going to double down. And the reason that we were initially attracted to B Corp was it was the first set of metrics that we had seen. There was a lot of talking from many people philosophically about business, but there was no hard metrics that were going to be externally audited by somebody. And big organizations are metric achieving systems. That's what we do. We like to point at something and go for it. And so that was what originally attracted us. And when anybody who's listening to this, just go on the bcorporation.net website and look at the B impact assessment and just look at the questions. And even if you don't become a B Corp, ask yourself the questions that you get asked on that B impact assessment, because it's a really thorough, comprehensive, thoughtful set of questions and a thoughtful set of metrics. But what I discovered in the journey of moving towards this status, if you like, is not only the role of the metrics themselves as a leadership tool, but the role of shifting peer groups is really important. When you're a big organization, and this is true for us as individuals as well, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that says that if you want to change the way you live your life, the quickest way to do that is to hang out with people who are living the life you want to live. If you want to become a marathon runner, join a running club. If you want to, get fit, go to a gym. And so what we discovered was actually aspiring to be like Ben & Jerry's or Patagonia or Athleta or Natura made a huge difference to us emotionally, mentally, as a company. And thirdly, this journey ignited the young people. You spoke about millennials. When you embark on a journey like this, by definition, you don't exactly know what to do. I mean, we're trying to solve some of the biggest challenges that the world's ever seen. So it's obvious that you don't know what to do. So you need the most diverse group of people in the space with you. And how do you say to people, I want you to help us? If you're a corporate, how do you do that? Well, you make some sort of big statement that says we're going to do something. We don't know how to do it, but can you come and help us? And so the young people and people whose voices are not ordinarily heard get a voice at the table and help you to problem solve. So we actually discovered that it is a really powerful leadership orientation change mechanism, as well as a set of metrics.
Yeah, you actually described it as kind of the Trojan horse of leadership, which I thought was a really interesting concept. Can you explain that a bit?
I mean, in a way, it's kind of simple, right? That what if you're trying to do, and I sort of say a bit about it in my TED talk, but if you're trying to do something that you know how to do, that's not very easy. You can do that by yourself. I mean, it's not very hard. It's not very interesting. It's very easy. If you're trying to do something big and courageous, by definition, you have to listen better. You have to share power in a way that is not normal in corporates. You have to speak to people outside of your little ivory tower. You know, corporates are designed to be opaque little separate silos that don't tell anybody anything. And when you're solving big problems, you can't operate like that, because no matter how hard you try, you don't have the answers. So you have to invite your customers, your community, your government partners, your investors into the conversation. So actually, this is just normal, magnificent leadership. This is loving, connected, open, powerful human leadership. So that's why I call it a Trojan horse for good leadership, because it's kind of, it all fits together and in a kind of a comfortable, not comfortable, in a human way.
That's a really powerful and interesting analogy. So one thing that I wanted to make sure we talk about is, Chris, you described the triple bottom line of environmental, social, and financial performance as elusive. So I would like to chat for a moment about the traditional focus of corporations, which is shareholders and investors. Some say that focusing too much on environmental and social concerns can reduce revenues. Since companies still want to increase their revenues while doing good, what are their expectations on return of investment? And does ESG really drive long-term value, or is it simply a matter of living your values and accepting a lower return on investment? And as an example, I wanted to share that in the news, there was an issue with forced labor in cotton supply chains in China, and H&M and other companies took a strong stand. And ultimately, the Chinese government and influencers in China hit back very hard, calling for consumer boycotts, even calling us bullies in terms of, stating that we thought this was wrong. For companies such as luxury brands, where the Asian market is a critical path to growth, should they still speak up? How do companies strike a balance? Chris, I'd love to start with you and then move on to get Lorna and Dave's thoughts on this.
Sure. Yeah. So lots in there. I'm not sure where to start. So I think sort of on the idea of, I don't know, this elusive triple bottom line. I mean, it's, there is a tension at times between sort of the social, environmental, and financial. But I think a lot of it, which I think is implicit in your question, relates to timeframes. So you have US in particular, capital markets, sort of the corporate structures set up in such a short-term fashion nowadays with shareholder primacy. CEOs, executives have these stock options that focus on, quarterly earnings. So I think in that case, there is much more of a tension, but, looking longer term, so many of the companies that I've talked to, so much rigorous academic research shows that if you focus on, environmentally sustainable, employee benefits, cultural, sort of, positive cultural issues, that actually pays off in the long term. So I think it's, sort of striking the balance for the long term and reorienting, sort of reorienting the corporate imagination to have it be very much more long-term focused. I think this is why, you hear, Larry Fink, world's largest investor, saying the company should focus on ESG reporting. They should have a purpose. They should be, climate, net zero. All of this is because, I hope he's cares about the planet, but I think he cares about his returns, first of all. And I think those are things that lead to long-term returns for companies.
So Lorna, for you, let's say you're running a fashion company that has a huge push for growing the Asian market. That's their critical path to growth. What do you do when you find out the cotton supply chain has serious social issues?
Well, the thing that I'll tell you a few things that seem to me to be true in this game. First of all, companies are really used to making short-term, long-term trade-offs. Businesses are doing that all the time. And by the way, humans are doing that all the time. We're constantly in a game of dancing between the short-term and the long-term. It's a natural human skill. And so you're in a position where you need to make whatever decision makes sense at the time, given the variables. But I'm going to come back to the subject of what you've said about who you are. And one of the reasons that I like B Corp so much is not only is it about what you said you are, but it's about what you're being audited to be. And it's about what you have said to the people who are your stakeholders. And that helps to clarify your thinking. Let me tell you, when I was in Danone North America, and I was faced with these decisions, the fact that Rose Marcario, who was the CEO of Patagonia, was the chair of my advisory board, I can tell you focused my mind. So it's not to say that it's easy, but the more diverse your stakeholder group, the more thoughtful your responses. And the more transparent your actions, the more thoughtful your responses. Because if you make these kinds of decisions in secret with 3 people who think like you, I can tell you where you're going to go, because I went there many times. But if you make them publicly and you cop it sometimes, I mean, this is not easy. And I can tell you one of the things that I urge everybody who's involved in this conversation, we need to understand that anybody who's running a big business has huge responsibilities. I mean, they're employing people who have families and have lives, and so these decisions you can sit easily in the gallery and throw as many bloody rocks as you like. It's hard. It's hard. But my view is that as a leader, the more you can help yourself by getting the wisest voices into the conversation with you as publicly as possible, the more likely you are to make a good choice.
Okay, that's a great lesson. Dave, do you have insights you want to share on this?
Well, I would say that, of course, all these things we're talking about are creating long-term value and long, paving the way for long-term prosperity, as opposed to, falling off the cliff that we're now headed towards. I would say that, the the biggest drivers, you know, that at least that I can see in the short term are the millennials and the young millennials and the Gen Zs, who are, you know, increasingly are going to be making up our workforces and our consumer bases, who are demanding you know, these changes, demanding that companies pay attention to these issues, and increasingly really aligning their choices in their lives to you know, around these values, and demanding that of their employers, demanding that of, you know, the brands that they're gonna, you know, buy on the grocery store shelf. And so there's a very compelling shorter term business interest as well in this. And you know, these consumers, by the way, can sniff out inauthenticity very clearly. So they're really demanding authentic action in this regard. And I think that we're going to be seeing those kinds of forces really propelling a lot of the movement. You know, for us at Ben and Jerry's, we don't do the things we do to build our business or to sell ice cream, but we know that that's a very happy byproduct of it. You know, we know that the fans who are aware of our social mission buy a lot more ice cream than those who don't. We've seen in recent years how their awareness of all of these issues has skyrocketed, and their awareness of what we're doing on them has increased at the same pace. And so there's a lot of very hardcore business interests to you know, to pay attention to, even if you're not convinced that your purpose ought to be to make meaningful change in the world.
There's another way that purpose has been in the news recently. And it leads me to my next question, which is whether there's a line companies shouldn't cross where corporate responsibility veers into political action, between engaging in politics versus leading with purpose. So recently, hundreds of companies united to sign a letter in the New York Times against restrictive voting laws in Georgia and other states. Dave, I think Ben and Jerry's signed that letter, and you've certainly said that companies need to play an active role as societal leaders. What are your thoughts? Does activism sometimes create a challenge with other corporate interests, and how do you navigate this?
Well, you know, I think Lauren has alluded to this. You know, in business, we're all the time having to balance competing interests, right? And so this is just another one. There's no question that it can lead to some discomfort and some potential conflicts. You know, if a company is wanting to lobby for tax breaks or, you know, something else, and at the same time they're going to be active on some issue that's going to potentially risk upsetting politicians they need. Those are things that they have to weigh. But I think the biggest risk is for companies that stand on the sidelines and don't take positions. I think that as I said before, you know, people are demanding that and increasingly wanting to know where people stand and are not standing for people kind of ducking out and not doing it. I think maybe that's the second biggest risk. The biggest risk is actually taking an inauthentic stand, and you know, trying to align yourself with where you see the wind blowing as opposed to what you really believe in. You know, the truth is that today it's much more important to have people passionately love you than it is to have everybody you know, think highly of you. And so figure out what your position is, take a stand, and I think that there's a, you know, there's, in addition to hopefully moving the world in the direction you want it to go in, there's business benefits to doing that as well.
And I know, Chris, you've talked about greenwashing in your book as well. It's interesting now that the SEC is going to be reviewing corporate statements on ESG to make sure companies are really walking the talk. It'll be interesting to see where we end up on that. Lorna, one thing you've said is that CEOs need to step outside their traditional boundaries for collaboration with other business leaders in ways that would have made them uncomfortable. Colgate recently launched a recyclable toothpaste tube. It took 5 years to develop the technology, and Colgate shared it when they released it. What kinds of collaboration are you hoping corporate leaders will drive to achieve big goals that they can't solve alone?
So I will answer that, but Dave, can you just tell us what is that magnificent quote that Ben & Jerry's has about the relationship with consumers, about values?
Yeah, well, Ben has said that the closest relationship you can have with your consumers is over shared values.
Yeah.
And so that's
love
sort
that.
of maybe the secret to some of our success. But the magic is gone the minute that you start making decisions in order to do that. That's that inauthenticity.
Yeah, I just love that. So yeah, I think the question of who you're collaborating with and on what is one of the most important questions that a CEO can ask. And I think one of the first questions I think that a CEO can and should ask is, who can I partner with to move faster, to meet consumers' needs more quickly, to solve some of these problems that I can't solve on my own. And the second question they should ask is, who am I most scared of? And then the third question is, how can I collaborate with the ones that I'm the most scared of? Because there's something about that dance that I think is really important. And you know, Colgate, legacy companies struggle a lot to see outside of their world, right? Because they've got capital and history involved in solutions that are way out of date. And so startups who haven't got legacies can come and, you know, reinvent these categories, and we've seen them. We've all been subject to them. And so helping yourself get out of your own way by thinking past that traditional boundary of who, you know, what's my current business and who can I compete with, who can I collaborate with, I think is really important in almost every way, and including the government. I think we don't, in this country particularly, we see the government too many times as the enemy. And the question of how you can collaborate to make great legislation, and how and why it's important for companies to cooperate in the legislative process, I think is a really, really important conversation to have. And I know that it's a huge part of Ben & Jerry's agenda. It's a big part of Seventh Generation's agenda. And I would urge, I would urge all people in positions of power to think about the legislation in their jurisdiction and whether it is for the social good and for the environmental good, and see if they can make it better. And I want to make this point about who we're scared of as well. You know, when Dave was at Greenpeace and I was like on the other side, I was terrified of Dave. Didn't know Dave, but I would have been terrified of him. And these days I would have invited him into the conversation, and then he could scare me in real life and hopefully, you know, generate better solutions. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the more wide your collaboration band group, the better.
Okay, thank you. Well, that is a great transition to my next question, which is that, as we said before, President Biden made a bold announcement today that the US would reduce carbon emissions. So if he called each of you asking for your advice, how he can engage corporations to help achieve this goal, what would you tell him? Dave, let's start with you.
Well, the first thing is, you know, I would suggest, Mr. President, that you demand that the leaders of industry just spend a fraction of what they're spending lobbying for all the things that they want in the way of, you know, directly assisting their business, and support my climate plan. Get out there on Capitol Hill and really devote some effort to it. You know, you have all kinds of companies that have declared climate neutral goals, and they've declared SBTI, science-based targets around greenhouse gas emissions. But very often the very same companies who express these great ambitions are actually, in one way or another, working against the policies that we need in order to be able to achieve them. I mean, none of us are going to be able to achieve these goals without the systemic change that we can only achieve by working together. And part of that working together is through legislation and policy. And so the president really ought to, call people up and bang his shoe on the table and demand that they actually put their money where their mouth is and work for this stuff. There's really no other way forward until businesses start to do that.
What about you, Chris? What would your recommendations be?
Yeah, so I think that around sort of the work the SEC is doing is having, companies be conscious or not conscious, be mandated to report on their, all kinds of different pollutants. I think, sort of Louis Brandeis said, sunshine is the best disinfectant. I think that, getting out there how much companies are polluting and holding them accountable for it. And I think, harnessing their positive action around net zero, like Dave mentioned, is also very important.
And Lorna, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with them, both of them. And I would add one thing. I'm going to go back to my SDGs thing. So the Sustainable Development Goals were created by the United Nations, signed on by like 190 countries, with the exception of the United States. And they were, I think, our best shot as a world of picking the things that really matter, that are going to make this planet livable and fair and equitable in the future. And there's been some great work done to actually cascade those country level metrics down to company metrics, by the way, by the B Corp group in conjunction with the United Nations Global Compact. And I think that those are our best shot of getting a broader set of metrics that go along financial metrics. I mean, there is a globally agreed standard on, what is revenue and what is cost, and, what the typical financial metrics, and all companies are required to to publish and have audited their results. We need exactly the same on environmental and social standards. And so the question is, what do those look like? And we need to get a handful that are agreed and a measurement system that are agreed. And I think that that's a cascade down from the SDGs. So I would encourage him to do the things that both Dave and Chris said. And then I would open up that engagement with the rest of the world on this challenge.
Thank you. Those are wonderful recommendations for President Biden. And now I'd like to move to recommendations for our audience to do a lightning round. So first question for everybody to answer very quickly. What do you hope our audience will take away from today's conversation? Dave, what are your thoughts?
Have a purpose that's about making real change in the world, and figure out what resources, what your opportunities are to move it, and be focused on that.
Okay, Lorna.
Find an advisory board of people who have opinions and values that you respect, and surround yourself with them.
Terrific. How about you, Chris?
I think our conversation has talked so much about B Corps, but I think that what we're talking about applies to all companies. And Lorna mentions everyone should go on the website and just look at the assessment. And I think that all companies can be better on this. They don't have to be B Corps. Actually, most companies will never be B Corps, but all companies can be better on ESG metrics. And so I encourage everyone to work on it.
All right, and last lightning round. How can companies help to build back better? Lorna, let's start with you on this one.
I'm completely blank. What do you mean build back better?
Build back better. It's really President Biden has talked about building back better post-pandemic, and companies can play a huge part in driving inclusive growth for our country and the world. It's really summarizing impact. Well, how can companies have the greatest impact both on our environment and on social imperatives?
Well, I'm uncharacteristically speechless, so I think I'll take that as a gift, and I'll pass to Chris.
Okay.
I think, we haven't talked as much about sort of social justice. And I think that, one of the things that I really learned from the research for the book that I did is really the importance of, again, I mean, it's a theme that I keep talking about, is sort of measuring and reporting on issues. So many companies that I talked to, said they're socially progressive, environmentally progressive, but actually when they ran the numbers, they realized there was a ton of inequities in their organization and they were embarrassed. And I give them a lot of credit for being transparent about it and telling me about it and improving on it. So I think that, get in there and understand your organization, everyone, because I'm sure that there are some issues that need to be addressed.
That's a great move over to you, Dave, because I know there are a number of initiatives that you are working on.
Yeah, well, that was certainly going to be my response as well. I think that really digging in and working to dismantle systemic racism and frankly the white supremacy that all of us on the panel have enjoyed our whole lives. That's critical to building back better. Lorna talks about the diversity of multiple stakeholders and the benefits that we have as leaders, bringing everybody to the table. Most of the tables we sit at are really, absent people of color and particularly Black Americans. We're all going to benefit immensely by bringing that diversity and all of the wisdom of all those lived experiences. And you think about climate change. We know that that people of color, communities of color, Black people often suffer the worst impacts of climate change. They're the most vulnerable for lots of different reasons. If we had more Black people at the table, well, we might have acted a lot sooner on climate change, by bringing their passion and experience to bear on that. And I think it also is important to recognize that this whole legacy of slavery that we're dealing with, the systemic racism that has really from the beginning systematically driven wedges between people. When you go back to Jamestown and the first slaves brought over, there wasn't a huge difference between the slaves there and the poor white indentured servants. And there was a very conscious effort at the time. There was a possibility they could have gotten together to organize and actually change things. And there was a conscious effort to divide them. And we've seen that throughout history. That was explicitly a part of Nixon's Southern strategy to divide poor whites from Black Americans. We obviously have seen it in recent years with Trump and what Republicans have done across the country. And so this legacy is one of the reasons why we don't have a functional government or an ability to make progress on these changes. And we've got to put a stop to that and get our act together within our own businesses. Ben & Jerry's is overwhelmingly white still. We've got a long way to go to be able to reflect the diversity of this country and our staff and our franchise network and our supply base. We're working on that. We're still at the beginning of that journey. But it's also important that companies continue and get more steadfast in the public positions they've been taking over the past year, so that we can all work together to finally bring justice to our society.
Okay, and now we'll take questions from our audience, and we've got some really interesting questions here. The first one agrees with the comment that some of the newer, smaller companies are the most able to envision and implement sustainability initiatives, but they mention that the established large industries make nice statements, have lovely sections of annual reports, and C-level positions focused on sustainability, but in many cases, the message stops at the high levels, and opportunities to use less energy or water, for example, in making paper, aren't robustly pursued where it matters. So what can be done to better have high ROI sustainable ideas actually happen at the sites where it matters most? Who'd like to take that one?
I don't know, Chris, maybe you, because that's a B Corp kind of question.
Yeah, no, I think, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it gets to, I think, a greenwashing, which was part of your questions as well. it's hard to, and I give companies, I mean, there is a lot of greenwashing. Companies get sort of outed on it a lot, and I want them to do a better job, but I usually give them some slack because it is actually really hard to get in, and change things in a business. And this is why I think, using tools and processes like are in the B Corp model. I think that other frameworks like the SASB, GRI, the work that's done on the SDGs to try to sort of bring them down to companies, that's what you need to do, is actually, sort of get inside the organization, not just talk about it.
So we have another question for you, Chris. We have an educator looking to move their school more towards nonprofit initiatives, and they wonder if there's an analogous designation to be similar to B Corp for nonprofits, and what should the considerations be?
Yeah, I don't know of anything analogous to it. I know that if you look at like GuideStar as an example of an online system where people can search NGOs, they actually rate them at, very like, 5-star, 4-star, based on things like, percentage that goes to the grantees as opposed to administration and a variety of different metrics. But, that's the only thing that I know of. I don't know of anything where, nonprofits can go through a systematic assessment process like for B Corps.
And I see, Chris, that you're typing an answer to one of our questions. So thank you for
I was
that.
going to, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Dave this question to give you time to type your answer. We have a question whether you feed your cows seaweed to reduce methane.
So we're doing a lot of work to reduce the carbon footprint of our dairy supply chain. It's more than half of our carbon footprint is from dairy. And the largest source of emissions from dairy is the enteric emissions, the burping of cows. And there's a lot of work being done on rumen modifiers, feed additives that change the microbial process in the cow's gut to reduce the amount of methane produced. And one of those is actually red seaweed, Asparagopsis. And we're very interested in that, as well as some of the other things that are being developed. We're hoping to be piloting some of those feed additives within the next year or two, and that has vast potential, along with a number of other things to reduce other sources of emissions from dairy. So I'm really excited and optimistic about the opportunities to make huge progress in just the next few years with dairy, and we're doing a lot of work in the area, as I know Danone is, with regenerative agriculture, that can not only reduce the emissions from growing feed crops for animals as well as food, but also turn the soil into a carbon sink to draw carbon down out of the atmosphere. So lots of exciting stuff on the horizon.
Thank you. And either Chris or Lorna, this is probably a question for you. How do you see the intersection of public benefit corporations and B Corps? And how do you envision these two structures impacting this space going forward?
That's definitely Chris, because I'm answering Paul here.
So I'd say,
you.
I think of it sort of like as a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's sort of one's peanut butter, one's chocolate. They go together, and together they're even better. So, the benefit corporation is the legal foundation, governance. B corporation includes that. And is also the assessment. And I think that I just actually talked to this afternoon the CEO of a company called CheckerSpot, a recently certified B corporation. They actually organized as a benefit corporation, and then when they realized they had to, do an annual assessment, they ended up said, well, we're doing all this, and we should be a B Corp too. And so it's actually a really interesting company that is a science company that sort of uses algae to create oil, and they do it for all kinds of different industries. And so now they're a brand new B Corp because of the synergy between the benefit corporation and the B Corp. I'll just quickly say, there's a question about the sustainable companies to invest in. There are a lot of B Corps on the public markets now. Coursera, recent $6 billion IPO. There's a number of benefit corporations and B corporations that have recently changed their articles of incorporation. These are already public companies, Viva System, Amalgamated Bank. So these structures are in no way not consistent with public market investors. And so, if you want sustainable companies to invest in, go look for the B Corps and benefit corporations on the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange.
Okay.
Or even the ones that have some B Corps in them. So if you take the Gap, for example, they're not a B Corp, but Athleta is, and
Okay, that's great. Terrific questions from our audience. Thank you, Lorna and Chris, for typing responses so we could get through all our questions. And I really want to thank you, Lorna, Dave, and Chris, for joining us to share your compelling insights about sustainability and B Corps. I know Earth Week is a really busy time for you, and we really appreciate your joining us to share your insights. And most importantly, thank you for your leadership in ensuring that business plays an active role driving systemic change. And I'm sure you'll continue to be on the front lines leading the way. Thank you also to the Princeton Club of New York, Cornell Alumni Association, and Conscious Capitalism New York City for co-sponsoring this program. And a big thank you to everyone in the audience who joined us this evening. The Princeton Club is recording this talk and we'll send everyone the link. Please join us for our upcoming programs, including another sustainability program I'll be leading on April 27th with Chief Sustainability Officers from Unilever, Colgate, and Societe Generale. And on May 3rd, I'll be speaking with leading journalists from the Washington Post, Bloomberg, ABC News, and the National Review about the Biden presidency at 100 days. I'm sure today's announcement and his initiatives on infrastructure and climate change will be an important part of that. So we're very glad to bring you thought-provoking programs like these that you can enjoy from the comfort of your home. Thank you again, Lorna, Dave, and Chris, for your insights and your visionary leadership. And thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us this evening.
thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. Bye-bye.